Criado pelo economista alemão Klaus Schwab como Fórum Europeu de Gestão em 1971, o Fórum Econômico Mundial foi rebatizado assim em 1987. E com razão, afinal, ao longo dos anos, o que era um encontro anual de empresários na pacata e exclusiva Davos, nos Alpes suíços, passara a atrair, além de executivos, chefes de Estado e de governo e integrantes de organizações multilaterais. Uma coisa não mudou nesses 46 anos: o homem à frente do evento. Em recente visita ao Brasil, para planejar a edição latino-americana do Fórum, em 2018, em São Paulo, Klaus Schwab falou ao milênio. Ressaltou a importância das mudanças recentes e das que virão na economia e no trabalho. Mudanças que são uma paixão e o tema do mais recente livro de Schwab, A Quarta Revolução Industrial.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech, we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
E para essa conversa com o fundador do Fórum Econômico Mundial, professor Klaus Schwab, a gente veio aqui para São Paulo, nos jardins tombados do Museu da Casa Brasileira, para conversar um pouco sobre a economia no mundo hoje e as expectativas para o futuro. Por ser uma gravação ao ar livre, eventualmente um avião passa, uma moto no fundo também. Mas a gente vai conversar assim mesmo, o que importa é o conteúdo.
Great pleasure to be here.
Professor, we live in times where people question more and more the role, the importance of multilateral institutions, like for instance the United Nations as being the biggest of all of them. And in these times, an institution like the World Economic Forum grows in importance as a forum, as a place of discussion, as also a platform of gathering data on our economy. Did you expect the World Economic Forum to have such an importance almost half a century ago when you had the idea to create it with your wife?
It's very clear that we are all part of a global community, and there are certain issues which require necessarily global cooperation. And they require cooperation not only among governments, but also between business and government. So the World Economic Forum responds to a need. And now where the official organizations, the World Economic Forum is also an official international organization, but we are not one of those traditional multilateral government-based organizations. I think people feel that the World Economic Forum can make a particular positive contribution to address the many challenges we have in the world. Independent on all the, let's say, anti-globalist movements, I think you need an organization which brings people together to address those issues like terrorism, like global warming and so on. We are not living alone on this planet.
Chegou ao fim a 47ª edição do Fórum Econômico Mundial. Foram cerca de 400 debates, de economia à política, de crise migratória ao combate à corrupção. A semana aqui em Davos começou focada no mundo e terminou de olho nos Estados Unidos.
But for quite some years, people had viewed the World Economic Forum as being aligned to a sort of thinking, economically and even politically. Do you think it's fair to say that the WEF has no political affiliation whatsoever?
No, we never were aligned to what is called neoliberalism. We feel, nevertheless, that it is entrepreneurship which creates economic development, and economic development creates social progress. Social progress without economic development would not be possible. And we defend those principles, but we also feel globalization requires a framework of the rule of law. And in the law, what has happened in the last years, maybe, and this has to be criticized, we have to include the interests of those who are on the loser side of the globalization process. And I have written in an article already in '96 in an editorial in New York Times that globalization without the solidarity between losers and winners cannot succeed, and we will see a backlash. And that's exactly what has happened in the last years.
I can remember that in your global risk report for 2017, it was produced by the WEF, you listed inequality as the biggest trend for the next 10 years in the world. Do you think that we are really doomed to be more unequal in the world, or is there a way out of this inequality?
Of course, we can do a lot through tax systems and so on, through reskilling and training to avoid a gap which goes out of hand. But I should add, we are living now in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. And this is a technological transformation. I just take as keywords robotization, three-dimensional printing, artificial intelligence, so on and so on. This will change the world very rapidly. And it will lead, like the earlier industrial revolutions, it will lead to certain skills which are not needed anymore. And we need new skills.
Em 2016, o Fórum Econômico Mundial lançou um relatório alertando que a automação poderá acabar com 7 milhões de empregos até 2020. Além da China e da Índia, o Brasil estará entre os países com o maior número de trabalhadores ameaçados de perder empregos para as máquinas. Por aqui, 50% dos atuais postos de trabalho poderão ser automatizados. Quase 54 milhões de um total de 107 milhões de vagas no país. Entre os setores com o maior percentual de empregos automatizáveis do Brasil estão a indústria, com 69% dos postos. Em seguida, a hotelaria, com 63%, e as empresas de transporte, com 61%.
So the challenge is, how do we create the necessary skills to deal with business and with manufacturing and services in the future?
The fourth industrial revolution is here to stay, and it's reshaping our world, our social relations, our daily life at home with all the gadgets and everything that we have, but mainly at work and the way we see work. What do you think is at stake for the near future, looking at work relations?
I think when we look at statistics, about 50% of the workplaces in the US are threatened by the fourth industrial revolution, which means they could be replaced by artificial intelligence, robots, and so on. So we have, as a society, and as a joint task also of business and governments and civil society, we have to see how we create the necessary educational training systems in order to reskill the people as much as possible. And I personally believe we will need more people in the social sector in the future. With aging of society, if you look We have still too many people who are poor, who are in need of support, not only financial support, but support, I would say, coaching support, mentoring support, to really be able to earn their own lives and to serve society in useful ways.
Entre os profissionais, os mais ameaçados são vendedores do varejo, agentes de viagem, operadores de telemarketing e até árbitros esportivos. Entre os mais seguros estão médicos de áreas mais especializadas, artistas de variadas áreas e psicólogos. Some years ago, Professor, I had the chance to interview Professor Zygmunt Bauman, and he spoke quite worryingly about something that I heard you also talking about and writing about, which is the idea of precariat. Can you tell us a bit what it is and how to face this problem of our time?
Yes, it's exactly this fear to lose your, if you know that in the next 5-10 years, your work, your position, your employment is threatened by let's say, a robot. Of course, you fear. You have fear, and you feel you are in a very precarious situation. In the past, we spoke about the proletariat, which means the people with low skills, low income, and so on. But now there's this new expression of precariat, which means people who still are at work, but who know in some way, maybe when they are 50, they will lose their jobs. So of course, they are in an identity crisis. They are very emotionalized. And that's the reason for the electoral success of President Trump. In exactly this, let's say, new part of the population, which we could consider to be precariat.
Professor, still talking about the fourth industrial revolution, we know that you are very fond of this subject. It's the title of your book, a book that is all over and been discussed worldwide. We talked a bit about the changes in the workplace and the function of work itself, but there are other challenges that the fourth industrial revolution brings along. What are those challenges?
It's first the speed. Many things which I described in the book 18 months ago were considered as science fiction. And they are fast becoming reality. Look at self-driving cars, look at robots again, artificial intelligence, drones, and so on. That's one difference which is a characteristic element of the fourth industrial revolution. But all the previous revolutions, they changed how we did things. They made us more productive. But this fourth industrial revolution, it changes us to a certain extent. It changes our behavior. It changes our behavior as consumers, how we communicate, how we produce. It's not just a business issue and relates to business models. It changes the society. And in my opinion, how we master this fourth industrial revolution is the biggest challenge for humankind at this moment.
Talking about the Trump phenomenon in the United States, some analysts have labeled it as a triumph of the forgotten people from the globalization. And we see also the trend of growing nationalism in Europe and all the challenges it poses to even the European Union and the European bloc and all the sort of interactions that have been built since the end of World War II. Do you think that there is really something threatening globalization? Is that some sign that we're going to roll back globalization at this point in time, or is just an adjustment?
No, first, globalization is like we had industrialization. It's unstoppable. we are growing together, we have to manage our global affairs. But if I look what has happened, change is so fast, the world has become so complex, so people ask the question, what is my purpose in the world? Is that what has happened with the Brexit, where people said we want to take control back? It's happening in the US, where you feel by becoming more nationalist, you can preserve the workplaces in the country. But let's face it, the world is complex and requires complex answers to the issues and problems. And what we see now is a populist trend where people say, we have the answer for you. It's a very simple answer. We have to be more nationalistic again. We have to take care of ourselves and forget the rest. But those answers are not sufficient in view of the very complex issues which we have.
Okay, we're going to do a short break right now and we come back in the second segment of our program. A gente volta no segundo e último bloco do milênio falando um pouquinho de futuro e do Brasil nisso tudo. Até já. E o milênio está de volta nesse segundo e último bloco com o professor Klaus Schwab, fundador do Fórum Econômico Mundial, aqui direto dos jardins do Museu da Casa Brasileira em São Paulo. Professor Schwab, now for our last segment I'd like to ask you some very specific questions about specific themes. First of all, some years ago it looked like the emerging economies were almost ready to take over the place of some of the more traditional economies of the 20th century. And at least for Brazil, it doesn't seem that this this prophecy has been realized or fulfilled. How do you view the emerging economies nowadays?
I think you cannot generalize. We have still China, we have India growing with 6.57%. Unfortunately, Brazil lost to a certain extent its momentum. But what we are seeing now in terms of the reform processes happening here, in terms of cleaning out the corruption cases, I'm very confident that Brazil will accelerate its growth and will become again a fast-growing emerging economy.
Taking from that point, how would you say Brazil is viewed nowadays from our external partners and friends in the world? Because looking from the inside out, the situation seems quite complex and difficult. But how do you see Brazil?
I think every country has to manage its own problems, but Brazil looks to me as being very inward-looking, very much focusing on its own problems, rightly so, but we should not forget that the world is in a very fast development. It's probably just now that China reaches the importance and the size of the United States, so it's really an economic heavyweight. But on the other hand, we should not forget that China still has to integrate several hundred million people into this process of creating welfare, moving from the countryside to the cities. So China is in some way an economic mammoth now, but like Brazil, having to solve its internal problems like lack of inclusion, like creating jobs for everybody. I think in both cases, China and Brazil, I'm very optimistic for the future.
Talking about your book, it had sold already more than 500,000 copies in some 3 Asian countries, not as much here in Brazil. But do you see yourself more now as a writer, as a scholar, as you are, or what? How would you define Klaus Schwab by Klaus Schwab?
I see myself absorbing the opinions, the ideas of many, many people. We have probably the best network in the world on a high level, but also we have a young generation dimension with people between 20 and 30s. I distill all those ideas and try to shape in an intellectual way the global agenda.
We talked a little bit about inclusion in our chat here, and I know that the work of the WEF is your work, but also your wife's work. And I'd like to have an answer from you about the role of women in today's economy and today's society, and the inclusion of women in this ever-changing world and in the biggest decision-making process.
I think it's not just the question of women, it's a question of femininity. We need, particularly in a very robotized way, we need more those, let's say, dimensions women stand for, which means sensitivity, which means compassion, which means imagination. So I am a great promoter for gender parity, but not just gender parity, the parity of femininity and masculinity in all what we are doing in our political and also business decision making.
If you ask a man if he wants to run for office, his first question is likely to be, well, do I have to wear a tie every day? And if you ask a woman if she wants to run for office, her first question is usually, really, why me? And that idea that, do you really think I'm qualified for it? And you have to ask more often, which, you know, honestly is really frustrating. So we said, okay, if we know we have to ask more often, let's ask more often.
And that's this last plain pass for our last question. What sort of thing feed your hopes in a better future?
It's particularly the young generation. We have become, to a certain extent, sometimes cynical. We are too much absorbed by the nitty-gritties of our present issues. The young generation is really much more globally oriented, they are more socially oriented. So I feel this is a generation which we should not neglect. This is a generation which has the right attitude, but we have to give them the means, we have to give them the education to enable them to come out with the best and to contribute to improving the state of the world.
Professor Schwab, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We want not to be robotized, but we want to leave this meeting even more humanized.